And then I'm going to mute everybody. Except for me.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rhonda St. John Hamborski, and I am a volunteer with the Wayne State Institute of Gerontology. And what that really means is that I have a real heart for aging and for topics around aging. I went back to school a couple of years back and got a master's degree in gerontology, which is the study of aging, and I focused my studies on Alzheimer's, dementia, and the brain. I've had a caregiver role for my stepfather, who passed away last August, and he definitely had dementia. Now, I don't think it was Alzheimer's related. I think it was more vascular related, and we'll talk a little bit about those differences as we get into the material today. So I've actually had the lived experience of having been through this and understanding how difficult it can be, how the disease can masquerade itself for a long time. My stepdad was a master's in mathematics, a mathematician, taught higher math in high school. And so his loss of function, his loss of cognitive ability was masked for a long time because numbers were his thing, and he was still so strong at that. So it took a little while, and I had just gotten my degree too, so I felt a little silly. I thought, boy, I've had all this academic preparation, and now I'm dealing with it in real life, and it's actually different. So, but we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the brain and memories, how they're stored, what we need to do for good brain health to help us with our memory, help us retain our memory. We'll talk about why we lose short-term memory, what happens in the brain, and I'll bring in a little bit of my study experience as well, above and beyond the material here, and talk about some other folks who experience Alzheimer's-like symptoms based on some life experiences as well. So, and the impact those have on the brain. So that's who I am, and I'm excited to get going with you today. Mary Ann, do you want me to go ahead and share my screen? I think so. This always takes a second figuring this out with Zoom. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is bring up our material, and we'll start her from the beginning. There we go. I know everyone's muted, but can you give me a nod or a thumbs up if you can see the slide on the screen? All right, wonderful, great. So I'm going to refer to some notes, so you'll see me looking to my side a little bit as I go through some of this, because there's so much good content in this chapter. I don't want to overlook anything for us. So our brains are all going to naturally age. We're all going to experience some of that. Now, why is it that sometimes we'll meet elderly folks who are north of 90, 95, maybe even over 100, who are still in possession of their cognitive faculties, really sharp, barely have any memory loss. My husband has an uncle who's like this. He's 95, and physically he's got a lot of limitations, but mentally he's just still as sharp as he ever was. He does have a little bit of short-term loss. That would be what we would call very natural aging, very normal and very expected, certainly by that age. My own dad is 87. He's had a lot of short-term memory loss, probably now for the last 5 or 6 years. I don't think that we're heading down the road toward dementia, but I do think some of his short-term loss has been accelerated, probably by some lifestyle choices as a younger man, pretty heavy drinker as a younger guy, and now he's on a lot of different medication, and so the medication load doesn't help with that. But long-term memory is excellent. He's still in full command of paying his bills, opening his mail, managing his finances. It's just that his short-term is shot, and he'll even say that. And so I've helped him with some tricks and some workarounds to help him accommodate the loss of that short-term memory. And as his daughter, I just have to be very, very patient, because even when I'm with him, I go visit him frequently. He lives in Arizona. in the course of a day, I might hear the same anecdote 4 or 5 times. Or I went to the doctor 2 days ago. I'm like, and what did the doctor say? I know the script. We've already had the anecdote, but I'll just prompt him right on through it because there's no point in making him feel bad about it. What I do try to do is help him, as I said, with some tips and tricks. And so there are a lot of things that bear on our brain health as we're growing up. Children of trauma, children who have been sexually abused, physically abused, who've had that trauma in early childhood will have an impact in the brain. And the area where our short term is impacted is in the hippocampus. And so it is not an unusual corollary to also know that soldiers who come back from active duty overseas with PTSD show the same physical signs in the brain of dementia that adults who have been children of trauma or adults who are suffering from dementia show. So that hippocampus starts shrinking, it starts atrophying, and you see that in people who have had exposure to trauma, whether it be, that childhood abuse kind of scenario, whether it be PTSD, otherwise it's just normal dementia from Alzheimer's or vascular concerns or Parkinson's or Lewy body. There are lots of different diseases that can contribute to dementia, and we'll talk a little bit about those. Let's move forward. I'm going to move forward a couple slides because if I were with you in a room, I'd have a tray with all these items on it under a napkin, and then I'd uncover it for a few seconds. And so what I'm going to ask you to do here is take a few moments and see if you can imprint these items on your memory. And we're going to come back to them at the end of our module together today. Think about ways that you might be able to remind yourself of what these items are. And I'll give you a few moments to look at it. We've got 10 total items. All right. So I've got a photo here, but I've also got a visual aid. I have a plastic model of the brain here, and what I want to show you is where that hippocampus is. So you may be familiar with what we call our reptilian brain, the amygdala, right? And the amygdala is down here in the deep center of the brain. We call it the limbic system as well. And on my plastic model, there's a tiny little white dot. I'll show you there. Bring the camera up closer. You see these amygdalas or amygdala? They are almond shaped, and the hippocampus is down here. So it's very deeply embedded in the brain, which is why it's difficult to treat and why with medication, we just haven't had the great successes that one would hope for in trialing these different medications for dementia. That's a very hard region of the brain to get to. And it is where our memories are secured, stored, recorded, sorted, attached to other memories. If you were with us last month, we talked about it as the librarian of the brain, the hippocampus, and it really is. So if memories are like books, the hippocampus is responsible for them, and when they're jumbled and a mess, it's because the hippocampus is unable to do what it needs to do to keep us sorted out that way from a memory perspective in the brain. We'll talk a little bit about why that is. So, this atrophying starts from a dementia perspective in that region of the brain. Now, this is true for both Alzheimer's dementia and vascular dementia. They both present very similarly, and in fact, it can be confusing to know which one is really causing dementia for a loved one or a friend. So if the loved one or friend has had heart disease, has had high blood pressure, has not been able to medically manage those conditions well throughout their lives, then they could be suffering from vascular dementia if you see signs of dementia in them as they age. So that could be more related to vascular dementia. And that's really what I think was happening with my stepdad. He was on medications. He also had narcolepsy, which is another disease of the brain, and just had a heart condition. He had a lot of things, comorbid conditions that were working on him in a not great way that contributed to this dementia. And it seemed as I go back in the timeline, My mom passed away 7 years ago, and he seemed like he was really, really okay at that point in time, but he made some very strange financial decisions without consulting with either of his kids, myself or my brother. Not that he needed our permission, he's a grown man, right? But my mother had purchased a new car because she'd inherited some money, and it was the first new car she'd ever purchased, and he turned around and sold it dirt cheap, lost a ton of money on it, and we just, were shaking our heads at what is Dad doing? And then he turned around and bought a downsizer home immediately, when all of the conventional wisdom says that when you're grieving and you're going through these life changes, you should hold off on any of these big decisions. And I went to visit the home. He lived down in southern Missouri. I went to visit the home with him, and it was filled with black mold. My eyes were burning. As soon as I walked in the door, I couldn't breathe well. My husband's an architect. I could see evidence of mold underneath paint. I started taking pictures and sending them to my husband saying, this really looks like mold. What do you think? He said, I believe it is mold. He can't keep that house. And so he bought it from a quote unquote good old boy in the area. And then that same good old boy traded him for another property. And it just didn't seem like he was making rational decisions, but we let him make those decisions. Again, he's a grown man. We're not there to question his decisions or take his dignity away from him. But as I reflected back on that time scale, that really is when I should have seen that we were dealing with, other than we knew what we were dealing with, right? That we were really dealing with dementia. He ended up over the next 2 or 3 years giving a lot of money away, being falling prey to sweepstakes, to hucksters, to people who would just talk him out of money. And as best we could determine, he ended up losing $70,000 or $80,000 that way. Yeah, I know, shocking, right? Stunning. And at the end of his life, that was really awful because we were running out of money for his care. So we didn't, as it turned out, when he passed away, but there was so much that, got away from him. Since his death, I've received 2 checks made out to him by legal firms who had somehow been able to go after some of these, probably through the Attorney General's office in the state of Missouri, because these were well-known elder frauds. And I'd try to tell him, and he just wouldn't listen to me. Finally, we ended up getting him to agree to a power of attorney that restricted how big a check he could write, that my brother or I had to approve it before he could write it. And the way he got around that was by writing lots of little checks. So, if a person wants to do something, they're going to figure out a way. But it was kind of a rough ride, I'll be honest with you, for that 7 years. And then I ended up moving him up here to Michigan into an assisted care nearby. And I'm so glad I did, because the nature of our relationship changed very much for the positive. Once we had done that, instead of me being irritated and frustrated with him, I realized how sick he really was, and I realized that he just needed help, and that in the last stages of his life, I could provide that, and I could serve and do what I needed to do as his daughter. So we had a quiet, peaceful ending to his life. By then, I had taken over all the finances, and he wasn't arguing with me about that anymore. He just couldn't keep up with anything. So, that was our journey. It was about a 7-year journey. Everybody's is different. Sadly, and I've got friends and folks who've been at this with a family member for, north of 10 years now, and it's just completely emotionally depleting, can be financially depleting as well. So that was kind of off topic in terms of talking about the hippocampus, but I did want to share with you that is the region of the brain where dementia first lays hold, and that's why short-term memory gets so impacted. The second region, and we won't talk about it in detail today, but it explains all the poor decision-making, is what we call the frontal cortex, right? The executive processing center. This is where all your decision-making occurs. Should I write this check? Is this a believable thing? Is this fake? Is this real, right? That's that executive command center, that frontal cortex. And we always say about young people that doesn't even fully develop until they're 25 years old. And that's why teenagers and college students make such bad decisions at times, like going to parties and not wearing masks right now, right? And things like that. So that frontal cortex takes longer to develop in us as humans. And then it's the second region of the brain that is impacted by Alzheimer's-based dementia and by vascular-based dementia. So let's talk a little bit more about the structure of memory. and what happens there. So we have an experience, right? If you look at this, this is sort of our life cycle of what happens. We have an experience, and it gets processed through different parts of our sensory systems and our brain, right? For example, you go to your granddaughter's birthday party, and there's a sensory experience of smell. There's an experience of taste. You know, there could be a really delicious fruit punch and then a really yummy cake. And so those are experiences that attach to that memory. You've had a wonderful time because you're with your family and people you love and that love you in return. And so there's an emotional memory that attaches to that memory as well. And that becomes something that starts out in our working memory. And then it's at night when we're asleep. And we talked about this in the last module, the importance of sleep, right? And specifically the REM sleep. That is when that hippocampus goes to work. And it sorts those working memories, those images, and it separates them, it segments them. It attaches that memory of your granddaughter's birthday party to other memories of your granddaughter, to maybe her birth or other birthday parties, or maybe memories of your children. So it does that, that attaching and that sorting, and it can depend on whether it's an emotionally related memory, emotionally charged for you, or if it's just a normal life's experience. And if it's sort of a normal life's experience in the noise of the day, then they're tossed. Those working memories are tossed. They're just images. They may not be very important. And this is where we see the hippocampus coming into play. So in working memory, let's say I went to the doctor today, I went to the grocery store today, and I put gas in my car. And, you know, and let's say I'm my dad, and my adult daughter comes to visit me, and I tell her about my doctor's appointment 3 times, right? Because I didn't attach it. I don't know that I've already told her that or related that anecdote. So that is, you know, what happens then with that short-term memory. It's tossed. He doesn't remember the conversation that we've had already about it. There's no way to cement it. The hippocampus just can't grab it at that point in time. So the working memory is considered the workhorse of memory. And, you know, this is where we practice, like if we're going to present or prepare for a conversation, we want to rehearse and plan ahead. We're going to have a difficult conversation perhaps with somebody we love, or I manage people, so sometimes I have to have some tough coaching conversations with them, and I'll rehearse those, and I'll make sure that I'm clear and on point, and if I'm going to provide constructive criticism, that I have evidence of whatever I'm going to be talking about, so that it's meaningful and it's truthful, and it's not just my opinion, right? So I might practice that in my working memory and pull up, okay, there was that event and there was this other event, and then that particular client interaction was mishandled. And so I would pull all those together in working memory, and it's that workhorse. It's getting me ready to have that important conversation. So that's what working memory can do for us as well, in addition to what it does by, you know, storing what's happening during the day. You kind of see that depicted here by the bidirectional arrows, right? It isn't just what you captured during the day that then is going into the memory files. It's also retrieval of that information so that you can repurpose it and reuse it, you know, in your life and in things that you're trying to accomplish. So what we're talking about is other than the retrieval there, is we're talking about all new information coming in, right? So there's the brain encoding, there's the short-term memory of 15 to 20 minutes and only 5 to 9 items. That's the max our buffers can take, right? Just can't keep it all. Then there's working memory, and then there's that while you're asleep in REM state only, when the hippocampus goes to work for us. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So if you will to yourselves, maybe try a couple of these exercises. Say the days of the week backwards, right? I'll just say it: Sunday, Saturday, Friday, Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Monday. Say the days of the week in alphabetical order. Now that I've got to pause and think about a little bit, because now I have to do a couple things. I have to think about how to sort the days of the week by their sequence in the alphabet. And then I've got to pull that out and be able to replay it, right? So I'm retrieving, and now I'm going to have to replay. And these are the kinds of exercises that we start to use with older people or people who might even have early onset of dementia to try to see how well they can do with retrieving information, correlating it, and then playing it back. Say the months of the year in alphabetical order, say the months of the year backwards in reverse. So these are, a couple of these seem pretty simple at face value. A couple of them are a little more complicated because there's some processing that has to go on as well. And these would be good things, good exercises to just do, in terms of brain exercises for your working memory. But also if you are concerned about someone, they might be good exercises to try to take them through and talk them through to see how they do. Scream with frustration for any that don't go well. Memories also are highly charged with the mood that we might be in. So you are more likely to remember events that correspond with your current mood. If you're happy, you go to that granddaughter's birthday party, you're happy, you're likely to cement that memory better. You go to that granddaughter's birthday party and you're at odds with one of your children, or you and your spouse argued and you walked in irritated and preoccupied, then you're less likely to be able to cement and retain memories of that event. So if those kinds of things ever happen, we talked about meditation last time around. I would simply suggest that you might want to stay in the car for an extra 5 minutes, do a little bit of breathing, maybe some 5-7-9 breathing, and take yourself out of that bad moment, put yourself in the more immediate happy moment, and flush all of that anxiety out the door so that you can enjoy your event and use that meditative and breathing experience to clear that noise out. So if you're sad or depressed, then those kinds of memories are more likely to trigger. The brain will tend to focus on those things because that's the mood that we're in. And I don't know about you all, but this has been a really rough year for all of us. And I found myself having a lot more anxiety than I would feel like I'm normally subject to have. I consider myself an optimist and a pretty upbeat, happy person. And I found myself feeling very differently this year often. So much so that I actually talked to my doctor about it. And we're talking about whether I want to start some therapy or do something to just help me manage why I feel so anxious all the time. So, I knew that I needed to get some help with that, and I'm on the path to do that. So I don't want to have a year of anxiety and a year where I don't cement the good memories, because we've had some great memories so far this year. We were able to do a family vacation ahead of COVID, and my children, my son and daughter-in-law just bought their first home, and we're helping them renovate it. And we're all four working over there with our masks on and on the weekends. But those are great memories and things that I want to retain and remember as good things that came out of 2020. And as I said, there's normal brain aging, right, where we're going to have normal memory troubles. I'm horrible about setting my cell phone down room to room around the house. I used to wear an Apple Watch, and it had a little alarm I could trigger to go hear where my phone was. I stopped wearing my Apple Watch, so now I have to be a lot more conscious of what I'm doing with my phone and where it is, because I also keep it on quiet so it doesn't ring. It only rings in my ears. I have hearing aids that are Bluetoothed to my phone, so it doesn't ring out loud, only in my head. So I literally, it's 5 feet away from me on the kitchen counter around a curve, and I don't know where I set it, right? That's sort of normal stuff. If I were putting it in the refrigerator, seriously, as funny as that sounds, if I were putting it in the refrigerator, dumped it in the laundry hamper, or did something like that with it, that would be worrisome. That would be time for my husband or my children to say, let's take mom to a neurologist. Let's get mom evaluated, right? Because those kinds of things would be happening. And if they were happening consistently with me, throwing away the car keys, putting the aluminum foil in the refrigerator, just filing, things that seem to be very normal, mundane, everyday things, those are things that are cues that we need to watch out for. So, and those are not normal aging. Those are typically a sign of brain disease. And this is just a funny one that, you know, we do tend to forget facts over time. And when we stitch memories back together, sometimes we change them. And that's entirely normal in the brain. It doesn't mean we're compulsive liars. It just means that that's how the brain works, right? That we've stitched a piece of this memory that really wasn't part of this other one, but somehow in our brain we stitched them together, and that's how we remember that event. And that's okay. That's normal. We're not making up stories or fantasies when we're doing that. That's just, you know, the way that it happens. Autobiographical memory can be difficult for us at times too. We tend to have a desire, I think, an unconscious desire to rewrite some of our stories and rewrite some of our history. And so sometimes that happens in retrieval of those memories. Maybe they were too painful. Maybe we need to make them less painful, that sort of thing. The brain gives us the ability to do that as well. So absent-mindedness is typically just not paying attention, multitasking, doing too much task switching instead of single tasking. Good memory really requires us to focus. So anyone who brags about being a fantastic multitasker, I will tell you, is probably embellishing the truth a little bit, because I don't know anyone who's a fantastic multitasker. And I'm even on business calls all the time, and I'm on conference calls, and someone will be sending me an instant message. I hate that, because I feel like I can't focus on those two things at the same time. I'm either on the conference call, giving it my best listening ability, or I have to divert my attention away from it and see what somebody wants on this instant message. And, you know, the company thinks that's a productivity tool for us. I actually think it's a detractor. I often will hit ignore when they come in, and then I'll respond to them later, because that's how I need to manage my brain and how I need to manage my time to not go crazy with the random acts of incoming that are always coming in. So I would say be sure and be conscious of that and find what works best for you. I know that I don't multitask well, and that I prefer focus. And when I can bring focus to a task, I can get it done quickly. If I'm multitasking, something that simple could take me all day because of distraction and diversion. So you know, have you ever walked into a room intent on doing something and then gotten in there and can't remember why you walked in there? And I do that all the time. It's probably because we're preoccupied thinking about something else, right? And lost our focus on what that task was that we were intent on doing. So we're going to do a little bit of a letters, numbers challenge here. And Marianne, if we could take folks off of mute, I guess I can I do that? I don't know if I can do that. We also have a couple of.
You can do it.
Here we go. Okay, great. And I did see there's a, can we get a copy of these slides? I'll be sure and send them to Marianne afterward, and you'll be able to have a copy. And they do have notes on them as well, so they'll be helpful for you. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to say this out loud. So first, let's recite the alphabet up through the letter J. So we'll start together. A, B,
C,
D,
D,
E,
E,
F, G, H, I, J.
J.
Right? Easy, right? We all know that. Now let's count from 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4,
4,
5, 6, 7,
7,
8,
8,
9,
9,
10.
10. Now we're going to mix it up a little bit. Now I want us to repeat the first alphabet letter with the first number, the second alphabet letter with the second number, the third alphabet letter with the third number, and so on.
Okay.
A1,
A1, 2B,
2B,
oh, B2,
C,
C3,
14,
D 4,
4,
E
F,
5, F
F,
6,
6,
G
G,
7,
7,
H
H,
9,
9,
I 10, J 11, K
Yep,
12.
yep. That's okay. That's far enough. Yep. It's a little more complicated, isn't it, to do that, because now you're taking from two categories and you're merging. So you're having to merge information from two categories of how you're normally accustomed to processing it, and that's a little more complicated. I think I mentioned also last month that I'm a study participant with the University of Michigan, and once a year I go in for what I will say are pretty exhaustive memory tests, because by the end of the day I'm tired and cranky and have a headache. And I have to do similar exercises like that with increasing complexity and increasing duration as part of those memory examinations. So those are interesting tests that you can also do for yourself. So keep that in mind, and that might be another one that you could also do with your grandchildren, right, as they're learning their letters and numbers, and help them build some brain strength along the way too. So we do want to pay attention. This is something I'm learning to do for myself because I'll often dash out of the house, say to the grocery store, and I've got the list of items I need. I've noticed things around the house that day, and maybe I only need 5 or 6 things. I didn't write them down. I get to the store and I bring home 4 out of 6 things. For the life of me, I can't remember what the other 2 were. I'm trying not to have to write all this stuff down all the time. So I thought, you know, I need to do better at this. And so I'm trying to cement these things when I see them, like I'm out of coffee. So remember how much you love coffee in the morning. Remember how upset you're going to be in the morning if you don't have any coffee. Don't forget your coffee, right? The cat litter needs to be changed. Oh my gosh, don't forget the fresh cat litter because the house will smell. So I try to make this a little narrative that I tell myself. And then I also think about the route I'm going to take in the store. So I'm going to start in the fruits and vegetables. Then I need a loaf of bread. Then I'm going to move over to the milk. And this just helps me be intentional and use my brain about going to the grocery store instead of relying always on having a little short list ready with me. So it sort of forces me to go through some extra exercise. It might sound a little bit silly, but it really can be helpful. We talked last time too about, or 2 sessions ago, I believe it was, when we were talking about using your non-dominant hand, and we talked about autonomous memory, those things that just become cemented in our brains because we do them routinely, we do them over and over again, like brushing our teeth and driving the same route to the grocery store. So drive a different route to the grocery store and construct that narrative for yourself on what it is that you need from the grocery store and see how you do. And then if you want your list in your pocket as backup, just to double check before you hit the checkout, go ahead and do that as a safety measure, and then, you know, see how you do with this over time. I'm putting my keys on the counter. I'm putting my keys in the dish. I'm putting my keys in the dish. I'm putting my keys in the dish. I'm putting my keys on the inside left pocket of my purse. I'm the worst person to
something 3 times to yourself if you want to remember it. If it's really important.
I'm throwing my keys in this huge bag of a purse, and no, that's okay, Josetta, no problem. And I don't put them in a consistent pocket, and then I'm so frustrated because I'm rummaging around and where are those keys? Where could I have possibly dropped them? So I have to do things like that so that I'm better organized, not frustrated with myself, and so that life stays calmer and more zen and not anxious. So you know, think about these little things. These are little tips that can help you. Like with my dad, helping him at home, we have a bowl for him to put all of his keys into. We got him a big paper calendar, a desk-size calendar that he has on his dining room table, which is where he opens up all of his mail and pays his bills. And so when he's been somewhere, as soon as he comes back in the house, I've coached him to remember to go sit down at your calendar right away, especially if you just came from the doctor, because you have a card in your pocket with your next appointment, right? So go record it on your calendar immediately. When you come back in the house, after you've been out of the house, go to your calendar, check your pockets, and see if you need to record anything. And then always check your calendar. When you talk to someone and they say, hey, Bob, I'm going to stop by on Thursday, see you around noon, go to your calendar, write down Thursday noon, Joe is stopping by, right? Just to help him with those memory joggers and things where, you know, we're not going to get back that short-term memory. So we've got to help him with some coping techniques. All right, I think my screen might have frozen. Let me see what I can do here.
There you go.
It definitely froze. There we go. So we'll go. We're going to skip the I Spy because it's really designed for if we were sitting in a room together. So we're just going to roll past that one today. So it takes a little bit of time to cement something into short-term memory, right? It takes 8 seconds of looking at something to commit it to your short-term memory. So don't multitask while you're doing this. Focus on one thing at a time so that all your brain power is funneled toward that single task. That could be that list of grocery items, right? That I'm sitting and I'm looking at that empty bag of coffee for 8 seconds so that it can help me cement it in my short-term memory. So that's another little tip or trick that you can try. And you can put this into practice by reading a news article and explaining it to someone else. So you've got to look at it long enough to take the important points away and then be able to relate them. I always like, you know, the order of 3, right? Because 3 is a pretty easy number of items to grasp and to remember. So if I were going to practice this exercise, I might scan the first few paragraphs of an article and say, what are the 3 most important takeaways here? And then I would relate that, right? And practice that. My husband and I actually end up doing that because he hates to read, which causes me great worry for him. But I will read things and then I will say, well, here's the takeaway, right? Here are the important points out of this. And then so I end up sort of being his reader for him. I give him no end of grief. I say, how did you get through college without reading? And my kids love to tease him, Dad, have you ever read a single book cover to cover? The answer is no. I think he must have a photographic memory or something that's helped him. He's an architect, so he clearly had to study things, right, and get through it. So it's funny. So when you see this picture on the left, what do you see?
See a donkey.
A
I
horse
heard a
and a
donkey.
seal.
Yeah,
Or
a
donkey.
horse's head.
Yeah, and a seal.
Yep, and you can,
See
if
a
you start
kangaroo?
looking, a kangaroo? Oh, awesome. If you look at it, yeah, it really does look like a kangaroo's face, doesn't it? You can see those things, right? So tell me about the picture on the right. What do you see there?
See
Oh,
a girl in a cap?
and an old lady too.
An old lady and an old
yeah,
man.
an old man or an old lady
Yeah, all 3 are there, aren't
with a
they? So
mustache.
like, the first thing I always see is the girl wearing the beret. And then when I look at it again, I have to focus on the mustache before I see the old man because I don't really see
now I
him well
see
otherwise.
it.
I saw
See,
the
you have to see that as a mustache, and then you see his nose, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I do see the older woman as well. But it's really hard for me to pick the man out until I focus on the mustache. I don't know why. My brain just doesn't want to process that. It wants to filter it out, I guess. But we have bias, right? It's based on our life's experiences. It's based on maybe preferences that we have. I happen to love greens and blues, so I think my eyes drawn to that cap and thinking how pretty that is, how much I like those colors, right? And then I see that pretty bob of hair and, you know, this sort of demure side of the face there. So that's why I always see the girl first. When I look at that, those are my biases. Those are my filters. And so we all have them, and those tend to drive us toward what we see in the image first and what we'll pull out of it first. And memories can be the same way. So we're going to bring our bias to those memories as well, and how we process them and how we save them. So let's look at this list. You know, are we just being forgetful or is it dementia? And I touched on some of these. I feel suspicious, anxious, and fearful. I forgot your name and then I remembered it later. I can't find my keys. I missed a payment of my electric bill. I can't make sense of my checkbook or manage my budget. I get irritated and annoyed sometimes. I forget what season it is. Sometimes I forget which word to use. I don't know what a key does. And I can't carry on a conversation like I used to. So the first one, I feel suspicious, anxious, and fearful would be one that I would want to look at further. Forgetting a name and remembering it later, normal forgetfulness. Can't find my keys, might depend on where you put them. You know, if you put them in the refrigerator, then I would be worried. But if you just set them on the counter under something and didn't do your repeat 3 times, I set my keys on the counter, I set my keys on the counter, I put the mail on top of the keys, right? If you didn't do your 3 times to cement it, that might just be normal forgetfulness. Missing a payment can be very normal forgetfulness. Not making sense of the checkbook requires further thoughtfulness and further inspection, right? From those around you that love you. I get irritated and annoyed. That's just normal life. I forget which season it is. That could be closer to dementia. Forgetting which word to use is a very strong sign of dementia. So if in combination with some of these other characteristics or symptoms, so not perhaps as just a standalone, but I did some work as a hospice volunteer for 3 years, and I had a patient for a long time who was in hospice with dementia. And when I first met her, she was in the mid stages, and I was with her all the way through late stages, almost 2 years of time with her. It was really a gift to have that much time with someone. She would get so upset about not being able to retrieve a word. And in the beginning, I could sort of guess what word she was going for because she had enough ability to give me cues or clues. Toward the end, she'd lost that ability and she just would get frustrated and then shut down completely and not talk, turn her head away from me. And my job was to be there as her companion and give her family some respite. So, I would play music or I'd change the subject and we'd talk about something else to try to distract and divert her attention. But that inability to retrieve the right word, that really can be a problem. Yeah, go Josetta.
Does that include proper nouns?
I don't know if that's so much a part of it. It's really, well, if you give me an
you know
example.
what it is, but not the ability to not be able to retrieve it fast enough to be able to go to the conversation.
Like this is
If
a
somebody
coffee
gets
cup,
it, you know whether
right?
it's right or wrong. It's just not being able to retrieve it.
This is a coffee cup. And if I couldn't retrieve it, I might call it instead. What we'll find is folks that are suffering from dementia will try to pick an instead word. And instead I might say, that thing, that thing, that drinking thing. And because I can't think of coffee cup. So
well, I guess
it could be
because
something like that.
I guess I'm really questioning you on that one because that's been a problem that I have for 20 years. My mom had it, I'm going to say 40 years. She did not have dementia at all when she died at 91. I mean, I'm not going to say at all, but she knew her book, she knew her this, but words have just always been. Now, I did have a head injury, a severe head injury in 1990, and I said I just lost my proper nouns then.
You very well could have.
And I can find it on the map. I mean, I know everything to do with it. It's like specifically, and our family, it's something in our family. I mean, like my kids even. And once when he had a girlfriend over, we were standing around a counter, and he said somebody was putting words in, and he said, "Well, in this family, it takes us a family to make a paragraph." So
yeah,
that's the only one that I just like go, oh my gosh. Okay, let's go on.
As I said, if that's your sole symptom, don't think that it's Alzheimer's, right, or dementia. But if you had that problem in combination with other things, and so you definitely could have had some brain damage from your from 1990, and the fact that your family exhibits characteristics of this kind of comes back to that old nature versus nurture argument, right? Maybe because mom was always this way, the kids became that way, and maybe it really isn't organic in the brain. But then again, it could be. It could be. There's so much we don't know, right, about the brain. But if you see a combination of 2 or 3 of these in a loved one or in yourself, then that's when I would say you want to try to get some help. First, you want to go to the Alzheimer's Association because they have just a a wealth of information on the disease, and it just to do some education and reading can be very helpful as a first start. Then they also can refer, you know, for other services for neurologists. I know with my stepdad, I really wanted to get him into a neurologist because he also had, you know, this narcolepsy, and he refused to go. He refused to do it. I'm certainly not going to drag a 180-pound man into a doctor's office, right? It's not going to happen. So, so I just said, okay, Dad, I think it would be really helpful for you and I both. But if you just simply don't want to do it, then we just won't do it. And he had an elderly doctor down in the town where he lived, and I accompanied him on his primary care visit, and I was on the paperwork to be his healthcare proxy.
Mhm.
So I was talking with the doctor, and I said, Doctor, I'm really concerned about, you know, Dad is having, and I was talking in front of Dad, Dad is having a problem with this, Dad is having a problem with this. Do you know what his 80-year-old doctor said to me? Normal aging. You know why he said that? Because he's still doctoring. So I was like, I just got hornswoggled in that little appointment, didn't I? That didn't work out very well. So
Oh,
you
go
know,
back, because I think the key one is really important. I don't know what a key does. That's huge.
yeah, that's huge. That's huge. To just see somebody pick up an item and not know what to do with it, that would have been such a piece of an everyday life. Yeah, that's really big. That's big. That's worrisome, right? Dementia is an umbrella term for memory loss and other thinking impairments. That means specific types of dementia are found under this umbrella. And Alzheimer's always leads to dementia, but dementia isn't always Alzheimer's. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Right? Alzheimer's always leads to dementia because Alzheimer's is a degenerative brain disease. It will result in death over time. There's just no getting around it. But dementia isn't always Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's isn't always the source of it. So vascular dementia, as I talked about, is the one that often gets mistaken for Alzheimer's. And the only way to really know if it's Alzheimer's is after death, to do a biopsy on the brain and to do those slides and looks at the brain to understand where the brain may have atrophied, to see the tissue, to study the tissue under a slide, to see the presence of those taus and beta amyloid proteins that are part and parcel of Alzheimer's. Also, Lewy body dementia is another form of dementia. In fact, it came out recently. Robin Williams' wife recently revealed that he had Lewy body at the end of his life. And, you know, he ended up taking his life. Very sad and tragic situation for a family to be in, but his was Lewy body. And it moves differently and it affects different parts of the brain than an Alzheimer's or vascular dementia does. Parkinson's will also lead to dementia if the individual lives long enough as well. And with Parkinson's, the speech center and the motor center are affected so much sooner than they are with an Alzheimer's related dementia. It's the most common cause of irreversible dementia. You know, that's why I said it always results in death. There are some treatment protocols that are hopeful, but they don't diagnose or they don't treat the disease and reverse the disease. What they can do is slow it down, slow down the progression a great deal. Some of these are under study outside of this country. One of the challenges with our scientific system here in the United States is that if we're going to conduct an experiment on someone's health, right, we can only change one variable at a time. And Alzheimer's has been compared to a roof with 49 holes in it. That if we're going to really treat Alzheimer's and try to get to the true source of why these proteins build in the brain, what causes these proteins, what causes the dysregulation of them, there are very convincing medical evidence that, you know, vascular heart disease causes dementia. We know that diabetes type 2 causes dementia. In fact, it's been called another form of Alzheimer's by some in the research community who are researching the disease. And so always we're trying to get to what's the root cause of that protein production. A pill could try to kill those proteins, but those proteins have already damaged the brain tissue. So if we kill those proteins, what else are we likely to kill? The associated brain tissue that they're attached to. So what we really need to do is slow down the growth of those proteins and get the brain functioning normally again. The brain needs good circulation. We need to exercise, right? The brain needs a lot of oxygen. The brain needs 50% of our heart function. So if we have a heart impairment or heart disease, the brain is getting starved. It's not getting the circulation and the oxygen that it needs. So there are things that we know that can, as I say, slow down the progression of the disease. Getting sugar out of our diets is really, really important. Simple sugars, simple carbohydrates are very, very bad for us. Who doesn't love a great slice of cake? I'm right at the front of that line. But to eat that stuff every day is a really dangerous path for our health and our welfare for us to be on. So also, I think I spoke about this last time, there's something in our anatomy called the blood-brain barrier, which sits at the base of the brain at the top of the spinal cord, and it filters toxins for us. It keeps the bad stuff that's circulating down here, like an infection, a respiratory infection, for example, from getting up into the brain. It's a filtering system. But as we age, it becomes thinner and more porous, and it starts opening up. And so then it can let things in to the brain up through circulation, up through that spinal column and that fluid that normally would have been filtered. So, you know, that's just something that happens with normal aging. And that may be largely why we see memory issues in normal aging, right? But we see these advanced memory issues in dementia. So let's talk a little bit about what will increase our risk of Alzheimer's the most. You know, it's something that we're all going to face. I believe the statistics are 1 in 6 of us will be directly impacted by it. After the age of 85, 1 in 4 of us will be impacted by Alzheimer's. Those are just the statistics. And, you know, we're living longer because we have great medical care, but this is an area where we haven't run it to ground yet to try to figure out what we can do about it. So our risk does increase with age. I think about my own family and longevity, and, you know, my maternal grandmother passed away at the age of 83 with a stroke. My mother died at 72 of cancer. My dad is 87. His mother lived until she was 89. So, you know, unless I'm fighting a cancer, my chances are pretty good of heading well into my 80s in terms of family history and longevity. I know I'm healthier than my parents' generation. I eat differently. I exercise regularly. I do the things that were not part of their lifestyle. So I know I'm healthier overall, but I do have DNA that has me at risk for heart disease. I have high blood pressure that I have to manage. And I have to pay attention to those things, right? That is one reason why I exercise more and eat healthier, because I don't want those strokes. My mother's sister has had 2 major strokes now, 4 weeks apart, has been hospitalized both times, and she's 78 years old. And my heart is just breaking for my cousins and for my aunt, right? That's my DNA. Her mother, my grandmother, died of that. My mother had some strokes before she died of cancer. So I have to be super, super aware of that. And back in the old days, we used to call that hardening of the arteries, right? My great grandmother died of hardening of the arteries. It really was vascular disease. And so, you know, so I have regular wellness checks. I think it was St. John's, which is now Ascension over on the east side of town where I live, that had one of those life screen opportunities about 3 years ago. For $89, you could have all these super expensive tests done, like carotid artery scan, ankle arterial scans, your blood work, of course. I had all of that done, and I came out with medium risk. So it means I'm not risk-free, but I'm also not at high risk yet. So if I can manage these health conditions and do it through lifestyle and commitment to that, and do it through whatever medication can help me, like high blood pressure medication. I prefer not to take it, but I had to go back on it again recently because my blood pressure just kept inching up and I kept having headaches again. So I don't want to wear out my heart, so I'm back on high blood pressure meds. But it's like my secret goal to not have to take them. But I guess I also want to stay alive. My doctor said, I told him, I said, well, I'm 3.5 years away from retirement. He said, well, we'd like to get you there alive. So I said, okay, I'll go back on the meds. And he's right, I'm wrong. I'm going to pause for just a second because I do see that we have a couple comments here, and if I can get to it, in the chat room. There it is. Let's see what we have. So, remember to get. Yeah. Thank you, Josetta. Instead of saying don't forget, say remember to get. Yes. Create that narrative, right? What does a PET scan show in regards to Alzheimer's? I probably can't specifically answer that. When I did take a semester on brain scans, and they're the most common are functional MRI, fMRI. So if you ever see that, that's the most common. And what happens is there's water and sensing of waves across the brain tissue. I can't offer you too much more than that because I'm not a neurologist. So, but that is the most common first brain scan for Alzheimer's. And what it's looking for, that use of the liquid that's in our brains and the fMRI techniques allows the technician and doctors to then see if they're starting to see more white matter than gray matter. If the gray matter is starting to shrink and there's more white matter visible in the brain, it starts to tell them that there's atrophying in the brain. And I'm sure it tells them a lot more than that, but that was my main takeaway from my semester on brain scans. Will using a CPAP improve brain health? Absolutely. Now, why? Let's talk about why. Let's trace it back. My husband has sleep apnea. He has a heart condition. So I just said the brain needs 50% of the heart's function, right? He has a heart condition. He had sleep apnea. He's not getting enough breathing. He's not getting enough circulation during the night. He could die from it if it's severe sleep apnea. His happens to be mild. So he actually wears a custom-made mouth guard instead of a CPAP machine. My daughter, at the age of 30, is on a CPAP machine, which is really concerning, right? At her youth and her young age. And that's because she was overweight. She's worked on that. She's lost some weight. She's doing better, but she's got her dad's DNA. And, you know, she's going to have more issues to watch out for her long-term health as a result of that. So the answer is absolutely it's going to improve your brain health, number one. Number two, it's probably going to save your life by wearing a CPAP because your heart isn't functioning properly when you have sleep apnea, and it can stop on you. And in fact, if you ever have a sleep study, what they do is they'll record the number of stops, the number of times you gasp while you have sleep apnea to try to restart your breathing and your heart. And that's what my husband had to do. He had to be instrumented for a sleep study, and then he came in mild, so they were able to address his condition with the mouth guard. And the mouth guard's a lot friendlier than a big machine. That's, you know, for sure, and a face mask. But yeah, that's a great question, and I encourage anybody who has apnea to please get your doctor to order you a sleep study and do whatever you can to help with that condition. All right, once again, frozen screen. Let's see if we can unfreeze it. Let me stop sharing and then share again. And that should do it for us. There we go. Well, did we get there? Yes, we did. Okay. So at the age of 65, one person out of every 75 has symptoms of Alzheimer's. You can see the dots. Whoops, let me go back. The dots on the chart here, right down here. Between 70 and 75, that increases, and as we get all the way up here to 85, sorry, there's some things blocking my screen here. As we get all the way up here to 85, 1 in 4 people are showing signs of Alzheimer's. So again, it's a disease that our risk to succumb to increases as we get older because the brain is simply aging. The brain isn't a non-ageable organ, just like any of the rest of our organs, right? It's wear and tear, It's just natural aging, and we can do things, you know, in terms of our lifestyle decisions and do the best that we can to get good sleep, to make sure that we keep our circulation up and moving, that we get our heart rate up 3 times a week. 30 minutes of any kind of an aerobic exercise, and walking is an aerobic exercise. 3 times a week will do it for us. Chair yoga, if walking is an issue, as long as you lift those arms up, right? You're gonna, when you lift your arms up over your head, you're just automatically going to increase your heart rate because your muscles are working and they're moving. So they don't even have to be holding anything heavy, but you're going to elevate your heart rate by doing even simple things like that. Now, this was a YouTube that when I tried to play it earlier, it went to a black screen. So I'm not gonna play it, but I wanna tell you about this book. This is called Aging with Grace, if you can see the title there. And it's called, also more familiarly called The Nun Study. And Dr. David Snowden, who's a PhD, was looking for a control group to study the brain. And what we want when we're doing a scientific study is a control group, a group of people whose lifestyle is the same, right? So to do a random, we call it a snowball study, to just publish an ad in the newspaper. You've seen those certainly. Hey, looking for study participants. That's a snowball study. That means you're getting all kinds of people in. When you're doing a brain study like this, he wanted a group of people whose lifestyles were similar, whose diets were similar, whose, you know, early to bed, early to rise, amount of sleep was similar. And so he got permission from an order of nuns in Minnesota to study them over a longitudinal study over a long, long period of years. And the most remarkable thing that he discovered is that he had so many nuns who were north of 90, and he had a whole bunch of nuns who were north of 100, and they had healthy brains. Now, there were some that did not have healthy brains. And it was interesting as he interviewed them and did studies with them, those that had, they had to write a letter to come into the order. And so they had gone back and retrieved all of those letters and analyzed them. And those that had sort of down negative tones, life's been really hard, I'm gonna leave the family farm and join the order because the farm was too hard, blah, 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 versus those that were super optimistic, like you know, I can't wait to serve God, I can't wait to join the order, I can't wait to, you know, serve my religion. The healthier, happier ones had healthier brains in longevity. The letters that had those elements or trace elements of negativity or unhappiness in them, those nuns had a more difficult time. Also, nuns who took a course direction in the order to teach and to stay literate and educated by reading and studying more, they had better brain health than the nuns who instead were directed into preparing the meals and doing the laundry and caring for the facility. So there was a definite correlation to keeping our brains active, keeps our brains healthy. The book, what I love about the book is it tells the story really well. It's a scientific story, but it's told in a very consumable, readable way. But then in each chapter, he gives out these little pearls and nuggets of things like lycopene in tomatoes, how good lycopene is for our brains, right? And he has all of these little findings from the food they ate to how they lived, and then he correlates it back to scientific study to say this is really good for your brain. Consider doing it, right? So I recommend the book. It's great reading. I've given copies away to friends and folks who've been interested in talking about the brain before. So really, if you want to get it, you can get it on Amazon. Again, the name of it is Aging with Grace.
Yeah.
Yes, just that.
Well, I'm involved with the nuns, and one of the things though that didn't come up in that study, because I'm quite familiar with it, is that most of them lived at that time. Now all of that's changed for the nuns and how they live and whatnot. But they got exercises because they lived in these large facilities, the convent usually. And so to go to breakfast, to go to lunch, to go to mass, to go to whatever, they were doing this walking, and that exercise doesn't come in. But the other thing that always kind of got to me is usually the food was cooked kind of like school. Now, I'm not as bad as school lunches, but a way maybe in a workplace. And yes, they paid attention to maybe a vegetable in that, but it wasn't the fresh foods that we're encouraged to, you know, cook from scratch all the time. Because yes, they eat tomatoes, but they probably came from the great big can because they were cooking for this group of 36 or 72 nuns or however many there were in the convent at the time.
Right.
So
right.
there's the little thing there about the food, because I feel that's really important. But maybe the canned food and whatnot that during the study, because the study's a while ago now. I mean, it is over a long, long period of time, but maybe food had less GMO and all the other kinds of things that we're seeing today with our food too. I don't know. We have different
Well,
food
and it
today.
could also, yeah, it could also be that the exercise that they got overcame the absence of, really fresh foods, that the exercise was a tremendous counterbalance to that. So,
Right.
yeah, it's a great book.
amazing. Well, the other thing is we laugh because I'm an associate member and not one of the nuns, has said, because there's so many that live to be 100 when we just had
I
two
know.
die now that are 105 and 103 in the last 2 weeks. And I said it was because you didn't have any children.
Yeah, they did have different stresses than we do in life. Yes. And they were absent a lot of it, right? You think of a peaceful life. I'm sure it wasn't always peaceful, but
No,
you
it
think
wasn't.
of it that way, right? So moving on to the common causes of reversible dementia. So these are things that can cause us to have symptoms of dementia, and maybe even perhaps be suspected or diagnosed with dementia, but we always want to look at ruling these out first. So depression, infection, thyroid, drug and alcohol use, nutritional deficiency, sleep deprivation, dehydration, super important. Also, as we age, our thirst, the need to quench thirst decreases. We don't feel thirsty. I go visit my dad and I set glasses of water in front of him because I've observed if I don't do that, he never gets up to get any, never, ever during the day. He gets a big soda in the morning when he drives through McDonald's and gets his breakfast. And I'm like, Dad, that's so not nutritious. Please drink some water. And then he said, no, I'm fine. I just started setting it down in front of him and then he'll drink it. And so if I ask him if he wants it, he says no. But if I set it down in front of him, he drinks it. So stress and the medication load, oh my goodness. My dad's on 14 meds. He's going to see his primary care this week. I said, please have them go through your meds again. Last year at this time, they took out 5 or 6. How did these get back into your routine? Because he goes to a various specialist and they re-prescribe, right? So this is a real problem, I think, for our aging family members, that managing that medication load. They don't need all those medications, and they interact with one another poorly at times. My closest girlfriend lost her mom at, I think, 84, and she was in very bad shape at the end, and she was on a ton of medication. And the last doctor that Sandy had switched her to told her that it was the medication that had taken years off her life, that if she hadn't been under that medication load, she would have lived another 5 or 6 years, had a better quality of life, and that no one was paying attention. So, and as a child of an adult, you feel terrible about that. But all we can do is take that lesson learned and try to apply it in our own lives and with those that we love. So how do we increase our memory function? Pay attention, be intentional about paying attention, use your environment, use things like mnemonics, acronyms, chunking, rhymes. These are all techniques to help us retain things in memory. We'll see how well we do with the items on the tray here in just a moment. Engage the senses, visualize and associate, exercise, reduce stress, and avoid alcohol and sedatives. Again, they do things, that aren't always great for our brain. Okay, so this is called a Stroop exercise, and I'm checking our time here because I think we're running over a little bit. So I'm not going to do this with you today, but I'm going to send these slides over. But we can just do a real simple version of it. So if I look just at the animal shape across the top row, I'm going to say penguin, giraffe, bear, bird, spider. I really wanted to say camel when I looked at the
I
giraffe.
cannot see anything
I really
on
did.
my screen. It's all scrambled.
Do you see it?
No.
I
Okay.
I can.
Okay. Sorry, Judith. I don't know what's happening there for you. What we have are pictures of animals with words on top of them that label them as different animals. So when I said giraffe, I really wanted to say camel because my brain wants to process the word, right? So then if you read back across and say spider, camel, bird, cow, horse, super easy because we're used to reading, we recognize words and we want to attach to those words. So this is a good exercise to do. Again, I'll send these slides out so that you'll have them. And, you know, if you can print off just this one as a chart, play with it and see how you do with it, and maybe cut it into rows and play with it a row at a time. When we talk about the mini mental state exam, is anyone familiar with the MMSE? Yeah, it's a test on brain function. It's typically given in an assisted living kind of a scenario or in a doctor's office or by a social worker when we are concerned that someone potentially may be suffering from more than normal memory problems in aging. My stepdad took it, and there's some numbers aspects to it, like you have to draw a cube and you have to go from A to 1 and B to 2 and C to 3 in a dot to dot. Instead of A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, you have to draw a clock face and put a particular time on it. He was able to do all of those things because he had that heavy math background. But then there are pictures, a row of pictures of large animals, and you have to name them, and he could not name them. So the elephant, I think he called a lion, right? He just couldn't sort out what they were. And so that's why I say his strengths, his brain strengths, masked his dementia for me for a long time. Sometimes I just think he's just being ornery and cantankerous, right? And it's just, no, he wasn't. It really was his brain. So yeah, just that.
Well, you know, what about people who don't have math strengths and then they're given those tests and that's a negative against them? I mean, I remember I had to count backwards from 7 from 92 or something. That was very easy for me. And I said, my husband's an artist. He's a right brain person. He's got skills that actually we don't even usually measure for intelligence, I guess I want to say. He never could have probably ever done that. And I know the pictures, I remember there was a hippopotamus or a rhinoceros. It was sort of like, and I got that wrong. And then she says, well, look at it again. It was sort of like, can't you use a cat or a dog? What about people who've never seen these animals? They've never been exposed. So there's a few things on that test but that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. But anyways, on this test, do you think your husband would have an easier look at do this test? Because he doesn't look, I read everything whether I want to or not, anything there's anywhere. I suspect you also do, but somebody who's not a strong reader probably could do this quite easily.
They could. He's probably focusing on the picture first. Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
So to
but
test
then also
somebody, sometimes we need to know the history of these people.
Well, we need to do more than one test. One test can't be a conclusive examination.
Yeah.
So even with the MMSE, it ranges your scores, right? And so if you did poorly in every category, then
Yes.
you're going to have a high score.
Yeah.
But if you did well in several of the categories and poorly in only one, then your score might just say normal aging. It might say mild cognitive impairment, which is typically considered a precursor to dementia. So, you know, it might range in that score. But once again, we just shouldn't rely on one exam. And if that's being applied to somebody, then at the same time, we need to set them up to see a neurologist and have everything, their overall health generally examined very well. So good, it's a good point that you make there. So we are running out of time. I apologize for that. I always have so much fun going through this material with you all. I'm going to have to make the slide decks shorter. So what I wanted to do now is I'm going to try to come out of the slides and see how many of the items that we had in the picture. We had 10 items. See how many you think you can remember before showing them again.
Car keys on a fob, race car, stapler,
Bubblegum,
Snickers,
Snickers,
feather,
paperclip,
paperclip,
ink pen,
yep,
Mm-hmm.
Sports car.
That's a car. Thank you.
And
So the last last couple were the scissors.
Mm.
I don't think anybody mentioned the scissors. The paper, we got the paper clip and the dollar bill.
I said dollar bill and scissors.
Oh, I didn't hear both of those.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Josetta, you were on mute.
generally-
Josetta, when you were giving your answers, you were muted, so we couldn't hear them.
Oh,
So generally, let me share that last slide again and look at it together because I want to give you some tips on this. So on this last slide, this is where I'll talk about clustering. And how to group things together to remember them better. So when I look at this, I see a red stapler and a red sports car. So I'm going to think about red for a moment. And then I'm going to think that there's also a pen with a red band on it. So I'm going to think, okay, I have 3 red things. Now when I see the bubble gum and the Snickers, I'm going to think about snacks and put those together. So I have 3 red things, 2 snacks. I have car keys. Maybe I can throw those at the car and try to remember the car keys because I had the red car. The dollar bill's kind of out there on its own, but then I would say you could also take the paper clip and scissors and even the pen and say office materials, right? And even the stapler. You could put the 4 of those together if you wanted to and say there are 4 office supplies on this slide. There are 2 red items on this slide or 3 red items on this slide. There are 2 snack items, and then there's that outlier, that dollar bill. So if we can do groupings or clusters of things like that for our helping our memory retain, that's really helpful. When I think I've shared this before, but when I take the tests at University of Michigan, they relay off a string of words and they're all mixed up. So they might say tent, opal, sapphire, camper, you know, and they go on and on. So within that, there are precious gems. There are things that you could sleep in, like a tent and a camper. And so finally, after feeling really stressed and feeling like, why can't I remember this stuff? Because out of 10, I'd remember 4 or 5, right? And I thought, boy, is there an issue with me biologically with my memory? And then I realized that I need to group them or cluster them to give myself the advantage in remembering them. So those are things that you can start to practice as well, tips that will help you with memorizing lists and items and things like this. And these are just good brain exercises to do as well. And so, Marianne, I'm going to have to wrap us up because I do have a meeting to move on to.
All right. Well,
it's been a really fun day.
It surely was. And Christine, I just want to thank you for hanging out with us today from HAP. And I will include her information in the email that I send everybody. But thanks for working on your brains today and for being with us at the OPC. You have any
Thank
last
you,
words,
everybody.
Christine?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You have any last words for us?
Thank you everyone for joining. We're so excited always to be part of this and to help support it. And if you guys ever need anything, HAP or if it's not HAP, just Medicare questions, please use me as a resource. I'm here to help.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. Rhonda, another brilliant presentation. And
Thank you.
we will see you next time.
Yes, see you next
you.
month. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I'll send the slides.
Bye now, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Marianne,
Yes.